why do we use UiPath, and how does RPA has, how does UiPath is making a very big changes, and how it is bringing the change, the automation era. So we have seen all of that. And today is we are going to start more about what exactly, how are we going to use a UiPath, what are all the components we do have, what are the workflows, how are we going to create them, and how are we going to automate those things. So these are the very basic things which everybody has to learn. So hopefully, before I start with my session, hoping everybody has done your installation of your UiPath studio in your machines, and hopefully it's all been loaded in your machines. So let's start with workflows. So yesterday we have just seen the UiPath Studio, how it looks like, and I think Guna has shared one of the very quick, he has took us through like how the studio looks like, and how to debug the workflow, and how the execute, how does that the bot execute, and all of those things. So just to give very quick introduction about Studio, this is how the studios looks like, and how you can actually create a new workflow when you're very new. Is here will be a the start screen. There are multiple ways, there are multiple new projects. So how are we going to choose which one you want, and how are we going to choose like which is the best for your project is based on the architecture which we have designed. If you want to go through the RE framework and all of those things, which has been already a templates which are created by UiPath, you can just go ahead and choose any of these templates based on your requirement. Or if you are just creating your own component or your own workflows, you can just go ahead and select any of these things. And for here, I have created all the processes, and how you will be knowing the differences is here you will be looking at the icons. It will be indicating what exactly which has been taken care. So here I have just taken one of the process, and I have created a simple workflow. And what is a workflow? I know like yesterday, like we have covered most of the things, but these are the things which we really also have to look into these things. So basically we will start with the workflows. Every project will very basic. When you are starting very basics, I think when you're learning, the main important things is to learn from the basics components, and those of the components which are going to execute, which are going to perform some actions in an automation is called the workflows. So the workflows represents a small piece of automation that you can just actually use in your projects. Basically, it is basically your canvases, the place where you are going to design your code, where you are going to just tell, you're writing the code and tell the program that this is what your piece of code is supposed to do, right? So we do have the different types of workflows, which are sequencers, flowchart, state machines, and the global handler. And why do we call these four different types is based on the type of the project which we are going to choose. We are going to choose that specific type of the workflow. And how does that looks? All these four as a different from each other. So when you just open this workflow and when you click on the new, you will be having all these options, which one you want to go for. So whenever I'm looking for the sequence, I'm just going to create a sequence as a test sequence.
Divyashree, maybe you can increase a bit more on the resolution side, screen resolution. Yeah.
Just a minute. I think it's already in the. Is this better?
Now it is better. Now it is better. PPT is absolutely fine. Only studio is not that much visible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me try another one. This one is better. Yes. No.
Yes. If can you zoom in a bit? It's 100
yes,
right
I'll
now.
do that. Yes, I'll do that. Okay. Better now?
Yes, yes, thank you.
Okay. Just give me a minute. But this should be fine. Okay. So here, if you just look at this, this is a very one test sequence which I have selected. And then when I click onto this, you will be able to see the properties of these activities. And what is this sequence? Is nothing but when I have a requirement where my code has to execute step by step, where I really do not have so much of decision flows, where I really, my code do not want the flow to be controlled based on some decision. And while I know that while like I just have to execute the set of activities in an exact manner, in an exact sequence, then we are going to select this sequence. And just to give you an example, like I'll just give, say, hi, and then I'm just going to say some name. I'll just say the dog, and I'll say welcome. And I always want these lines to be executed in the same manner. It doesn't matter like whatever the input, whatever the output. I want these code to be executed in always a simulate manner. So in this case, we are going to select a sequence. And we do have another one called a flowchart. And I'll just take it as a text flowchart, where this is a bit different from the sequence, where our flowchart is going to help us to flow the code based on the decisions. So in this case, let's consider I have same as a log message. Yeah. Let me take this one. I just make it as hi, and I'll just take decision flow, and here I'll just take, okay, sorry, I got a property here. Just do Control K, name dot string. Of yeah. Range of figure. Then I just want to say I figure. Yes.
Divya, this is again 100%. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm just forgetting this. Okay, looks good now. Okay. So here, if it is not bigger, if it is something else, then I just want to say hi. This is new user plus name. You don't worry about this, what I'm creating and decisions and all of those things. Here I'm just going to explain the difference between the sequence and then the flowchart and then the state machines. You just concentrate on these things first, and then we will come back to these variables, arguments, flowcharts, I mean the decisions, everything. We will be again coming back in the same session. So for now, I'll just take one of the sample I have given as Divya now. So now if I just debug, my output says the output, hi. Okay, just a minute. See. Oh, sorry. So here it says hi Divya. So here if you just look at the output, it says hi and hi Divya it comes. So here if I just change Divya here, so let me make it as killer, and if I just run this, it will just says hi, this is a new user and it's a killer. So based on the different values which we are going to take and input, so there will be two decision flows. So one is true and one is false. Based on true or false, we will be able to continue our flow on whatever the input which is going to take from the user or from the previous steps output. We will be just controlling the flows with the different flows based on the decision. So this is how the workflows looks like, but we will not be having those kind of. And also one advantages of workflow is you really do not have to use loops, so you can just go ahead and have this link from here to here, so it will be keep on looping these activities until some of this condition is going to false or any such kind of breaks which we are going to provide. But in sequence you will not be able to have the control, like you cannot have the control of the bottom activity back to the top one. Okay, this is the sequence of the series of activity which will be going to execute in the sequence. But in the flowchart, we will be able to have the more control towards the looping, towards the sending control backs to the previous activities, or based on the decision, the control will flow. So based on these kind of requirements, you can choose between the sequences and the flowchart. And then we do have the third one as the state machine. And if I just go here, test state machine, just make it as 130. So here, like in the flow decision, we have this as a decision flow, and we were able to take just the true or false. But now, if I'm just going to go here and take a state, and from this one, I'm just going to take another states. It is not going to generate only one state, but you will be able to execute multiple states from the output of the first state. So here, if you just look at the control, you will be getting this one. So here, if the state one, if the initial state is going to generate an output as 1, you will be able to execute the state 1. If the output of the initial state was 2, you will be able to execute the state 2. If the output of the initial state is 3, you will be execute the state 3. So it is not only about 1, 2, 3, you will be able to have like many number of states, how much ever you are capable of having in your project. So this is about the state projects where maybe most our RE framework has been designed based on the state machine. And definitely even here you will be having an option to look back. Maybe you can, if you want, there is some condition which is going to be executed after the state 3, your control has to come back to state 1 and then you have to execute state 3. All these controls are more possible when it comes to the state machine. When we have the real case scenarios where our process is really complex, where our program is depending on multiple factors of the inputs, in any of such cases, we will be using this state machine. So why we have gone through all these things is the very basic things. Your projects will be always starts from the or either sequence or a flowchart or a test machines. State machines. So here today, we will be looking about the variables, the arguments, and the control flows. So let's start about the variables. So this is all about the workflows, and that's how you start creating a simple programs and the simple projects in the UiPath, right? So let's see what is the variable. So variable is nothing but the containers that can hold the multiple data or multiple entry data of the same data type. So let's consider, like for an example, I have some email ID, and email ID is a name of the variable, and that name of the variable can hold one different email at a time per execution. while it is while we are executing one program, one variable can hold one value, and that value can be different for each iteration or for each execution, right? So the variables help us to pass the data from one activity to another, and also advanced programming would hardly possible without using the variables. So let's see here in this one. I'm just going to close. No. So here I have just created one of the variable called name, and here I'm passing it as a killer. And in this iteration, while we are doing this specific iteration or this specific run, it is holding the value called killer. But now I'm going to use the same variable. So here the output looks like this is a new user killer. But for the same thing, for the same variable, I'm going to assign a different value for next execution. That is called Divya. And if I just run this, the same variable has been used, but the different value has been passed. So this is how it looks like a container. And also, this is passing the data from one activity to another. So here in the initialization, we have just initialized the value, the default value as Divya, and the same value is carrying in the flow decision first, and it is checking if that specific variable contains so and so text. If yes, then again the same data is passing it here in the right line also. So it is not about it is going to consider only for one or two activities. It is going to carry the same data throughout the execution. So this is what the variables is. And how are we like properties of the variables? What are the properties of the variable is nothing but the name, type, default value, and the scope. These are the four different properties of the variable. So name of the variable indicates the unique ID, and it defines the way it is being displayed and used. It should be always a unique. You cannot create two different variables in the same scope with the same name. So it is a kind of unique identifier for each and every variable which you are going to create. And the type is going to define what is the kind of the data type which the variable has to carry. So for an example, we do have the strings, and then int, boolean, and then arrays, dictionary, list, email ID, which it's like it is like a different types of variables. And especially in UiPath, you can use all the types of the data variables which are going to support from the C#. You will be able to just add those types, and then I'm going to show you all these things where we are going to create and what are these properties and all of those things. The default value is the initial value of the variable. If none of the other value has been assigned, it will be considered that value for the execution. And we will also be able to change those values when we are doing when we are running the program at the runtime. And also we will be able to do the manipulation to those values once it has been assigned. If we want to do some calculation, or if we are doing any of the string manipulations and then assign back to the same variable, that is also possible. But when we are not doing any of these things, when we are not calculating something, or when we are not passing any other values, the default value which has been assigned will be always taken as the default value, and which will be used for that current execution. And then the scope. When it comes to the scope, it defines the area. It defines the presence of that variable or the scope of that variable in which the value of that variable is visible. It says the global and the local are the two different scopes which define the variables, which defines the visibility of the variables in the workflow. So let's see what is that. Is here, if you just look at this, I do have just one simple test workflow, and I can create another workflow inside of a workflow, or another sequence inside of the workflow. So here, if I just take this sequence, and here I'm just going to create one of the workflow assign I'll take assign, and I'm just going to create a create a variable called username. And here I'm just going to add it as developer. And this one, we have created one of the variable called the username. And here, if you just look at this, we have one container as a flowchart and another container as a sequence. So we do have two different scopes now. But we have the name. Name is in the always the outer scope. And if I have the name in the outer scope, can be called easily inside of the inner scope. So here in the log messages, I really do not have to create anything. If you can just go ahead and look for that variable, it is already available. Name, you can call it. But here we have created a username inside of the sequence. And here in the variable panel, we do have the scope, and this defines the scope of that variable which we have created. And here the scope has been defined as a sequence. And when you come out of the sequence and inside of the workflow, if you just try to look for that username, this will not be available. See, the username is not available. So this defines the scope. The scope is nothing but the visibility of the variable for which specific container or for which specific the flowchart or the sequence which we are defining, that is going to define the scope. And what does it mean by the global variable is nothing but it is going to be available throughout all the processes, whatever we are looking, whatever we are invoking inside of this one. So here the name in the workflow which we have created, we do have two different workflows. One is the flowchart and another one is the sequence. The name is a global workflow because it is there, it is accessible for all the workflows which we have created inside of this one. So, but this one is just the local, because this is valid only for this specific sequence. So this is valid only for the local one. And this is about the scopes and yeah, the default values. So here, if you just look at this, I have given Divya as a default value. So if I have not given anything at all at the name, it is going to take it as hi Divya. But let's consider I want to modify anything. So here I'll just put it here and I'll assign name as developer and I want to print a name. And here by default I have not assigned anything and I'm just changing the name here as a developer, and by default I have given as a Divya. So if I just run this workflow, first, it will take the default value, that is nothing but Divya, and then I have made the change for this variable as a developer, and the latest after we made the change, the value is the developer for that name. So this is what the default value and the value which can be changed later. And when it comes to the type of the variable, here we do have the variable type as a string. It is not always a string. Here, if you just look at, click on this drop down, you will be able to select what are the different types of variable type you want to create. If you want anything outer than this list, you can click on browse for the type. Here you will be able to find all of this. If you want like system.date, you can take date time. If you want data table, like let's consider I want a data table. Data table. So here we will be having all the activities, all the different types of the variables we do have with respect to the data table. And then if you want to go for dictionary, you can just go ahead and search here as a dictionary. So we will be having all the types of the variables which are supported by the .NET. We will be able to just go ahead and pick it up. So these are the types of the variables. And then how are we going to create these variables? So now we have seen like how we have seen how the scope, how to define the scope, how to define the default value for the variables and all of those things. Now how are we going to create these variables? Or there are three options. One is from the variable panel, one is from the expression, and another one from the property panel. So what is these things is nothing but here, if you just look at this is the variable panel where here you have an option called a create variable. You can just go here and then create a variable called age. And I want this in integer. And I want to define the scope. This is one way of creating that. Else, another way is here I'm just going to go ahead in the property panel basically. In the name, I don't want this one. I want to create my own. So here you will be able to create a new variable. So for that, either you can just do right click, choose a create variable and give date of birth, something like that. Or you can also do this, like in any of the activities in which you want to create a variable, click on the activity and press Control K. Control K is a shortcut to create a variable, and then you can create a variable called place. Or even here you can just right click and select this create variable, and you will be able to add this one. So this is about how are we going to create the variables, the different methods to create a variable. So now we will just see one simple demo, like what is a variable and how we are going to do all these things. So here in this demo, I have just created one simple workflow where I am taking the input from the user always, and how to take the user input from the user always by using an input dialog. The input dialog activities in UiPath is going to help us to take the input from the user, and then I'm just going to print that message, whatever I have, whatever the user is going to enter. So I'm just going to execute this, and this has been started. And here is the value, so I'm going to give Divya, and here is the message box. Divya is logged in, right? So every time I can change this. I have not given any of the default values here. And let's consider, I'm just going to rerun this once again, and this time I'm just going to change this value to Rohit, and my output says Rohit is logged in. So this is how you can actually take the input from the user at the runtime, and you will be able to use that going forward. And here we have created a variable called the username and the status. Both is of the type of string, and status is nothing but we are assigning is logged in as a value to the status. And I'm taking this username from the user. So here the output will be the username. That is a variable again. And while printing, I'm just printing the username from the user, and the is logged in as a string. And it is not always like you have to assign this to one of the variable and you have to take. You can also do the string manipulations in a very simple manner. Like I'm just going to explain you here is simple string manipulation activities. You can also use the concatenation, and definitely the concatenation is always used by the plus symbol. And here you can say is logged in first time. So this is a very simple string manipulation which I'm doing here. And when I execute this, the God will run, and here I'll give Divya, and the output is here. Just a minute. Here. Divya is logged in first time. So we are doing the string manipulation. So let's consider I don't want like I have given by mistake the user has given some spaces in between in the name, or they have given some special character or something like that. In that, we can also use some of the string manipulation method, like dot replace of, I am giving, let's consider underscore with space. And I'm just going to give you guys one simple demo about the very simple string manipulation. And I'm going to provide the username as underscore Shri. And your output, the space Shri is logged in for the first time. So here we are doing a very small string operations where we are replacing this underscores with space. And we have also done the concatenation of these things. It's not about the replacement and concatenation. You will be able to do all the string manipulations which are available from the C#. You can just go ahead and have all of those things here. So this is more all about the variable, and if you want to know more about this variables, you can just refer this link, which will be shared later. And let's see the arguments now. So we have seen variables, we have seen the scope of the variables, how data is passing from one activity to the next activity. So now let's consider, I don't want my data to be passed from one activity to another activity, but I want my data to be passed from one workflow to the whole another workflow. How are we going to do that? How are we going to achieve? Because the scope of the variables is going to define only within the scope of that, only within that workflow, or maybe the global workflow for which, in which that is nothing but the current workflow has been created inside of the another workflow. But let's consider it is not created inside. I want the same workflow to be called multiple times in multiple places, and I want to take the input from all different places, and I want to pass that value to as an input for this workflow, and then I want to process that. In that is the case, we are going to use the arguments. Arguments are very similar to the variables, where they will be saving the data of the same data type always. And then they supports the same methods and the properties, like how we have this, like the different types of the data type and all of those things. It is going to define those things. The difference is that the main difference between the argument and the variable is the data holder within the workflow, which passes the data from one activity to another activity. But the arguments are the data holders, which passes the data from one whole workflow to another workflow. And the different types of the workflow, I mean arguments, it's not about the types, it's about the direction, is in, out, and in, out. So what is this in, out, and in, out? Why do we use these three types? Well, I'll just explain you in the next one, right? So how are we going to create an argument? And we'll see that in UiPath. So here, let me just put this. Second one. So arguments also, we will be able to create it from different panels, like 3 different ways to create arguments. So here, under the project, and let me make this 130. So here, when you come to the project, I have created 2 different XAML files and 2 different, that is nothing but 2 different workflows. And 2 different XAML files. I'm calling this calculate sum inside of this main. I want to pass the value of few, like some variable 1 and variable 2 to this calculate sum, and then the calculate sum is going to return me a result. So how are we going to do this is here, if you just create any of the workflow, you will be able to see this argument panel here. So if you want to create a variable argument, Just the way you created a variables from the variable panel, you can also create an argument from the argument panel. What is this direction is nothing but in is nothing but we are taking the input from the workflow which is calling, and the out is nothing but we are always passing the value of this one from the called workflow to the outer one. And what is in out is nothing but there is one variable for which I want to take that as an input and then do some modification here and pass that as an output. This is what it is going to work here. So here, if you just look at this, we do have the argument types, and even the argument types, you will be able to browse any of the type, which is all supported by the .NET, just the way it is in the variables. And also the default value, like the output variables will not be having the default values, but the input argument can take the default value always, right? So here, this is one way of creating the arguments, or you can also do whenever you're calling the workflow here, when you click on the import work arguments, here also you will be able to create an argument. You can just click on and then right click.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Divya, can you zoom to 140? I think there is space on the side, so maybe that can help.
Sure. Better?
Yes, this is clear. Thank you.
Okay. So this is how, like, you can also create a variable here from this invoke workflow activities. And also for each and every activity which you are going to create, you will be having the properties here in your right hand side, where you will be able to define the common properties, inputs and outputs, everything has been defined. And here I'm just giving the default values. So let's consider, I'm just going to add it as 21 and then I'll make it as 22 and I'll click on OK. And let me just debug this one. So here I'm executing only the main, but I'm actually doing the calculation instead of the calculate sum. But here, if you just look at this one, the calculation completed, the result is 43. Right? So this is what we are going to get an output. So basically it is taking an input from the main, we are passing the inputs from the main to the calculate sum. Instead of the calculate sum, we are doing all the calculation, that is nothing but the addition. We are doing the addition here. And we are passing the result, that is nothing but the sum of these two values. We are passing that to a out direction instead of the out direction. And I am able to print the value of this sum outside of this workflow, which is inside of the main, as a result here. That is nothing but sum.toString. So this is how the arguments has been used to pass the data between one workflow to another workflow whenever we are calling. Like how to do this invoke workflow, you can just drag and drop. You will be able to get these things. And here, if you just look at this, it says 0, but we do have all the arguments here. So I just want to call this here. If you just look, I'm able to get all these things, and I'm passing this one to. I'm going to take this as execution info. So let me pass two different values here. So let me pass 30 and 10 for the second time. And let me do the same option here. See, Control V. So here, if you just look at this, I'm using the same workflow. I'm calling this multiple times, and each time I'm passing the different values. First time I'm passing 21 and 22, and second time I'm calling the same value with the different values. That is nothing but 30 and 10. And if I just want to execute this, the first execution, it is going to give me a result that is 21 plus 22. And then the second time it gave me the calculation completed, result is 40. So here is what is the use of arguments is nothing but if you want to call the same workflow, that is the same piece of code multiple times with the different values which comes from the different sources, then we will be those as an argument, and then you will be able to pass those arguments from the main workflow from which you are calling, and then you will be pass the value inside of the workflow and also do some modification inside of the workflow and then pass it back to the main workflow, so that we will have all the values has been updated and as an expected results. So this is about the arguments. And then for more details, if you want like having the more complex examples and you want to learn more about, you can just go ahead about with the documents in the UiPath, and you can just go ahead with the managing arguments, which you will be receiving these links in the chat maybe later sometime. So now let's start about the control flow and its statements. So now we have seen, now we know how to use the variables. Now we know how to use the arguments. That is nothing but we know how to pass the data. And now we want to have the control over the data. It is not always about passing the data. We should have more control over the each and every value which we are passing. And based on some decision, whether we want to, okay, let's consider, I have given the sum, and let's consider I want to check if the sum is less than 50 or greater than 50. If it is less than 50, I want to do something. If it is more than 50, I want to do something. If I do have any such kind of activities in order, like it is nothing but the control flow is nothing but in specific which order my activities has to be executed. Or like it is like enhanced with two concepts such as sequence and workflows, which we have seen in the very first stage of our session. What was the sequence and what were the workflows, where we have like more controls over about the flow, how it has to be done. And the most used, the defined control flow statements, but if, while, do while, for each, switch, and parallel. These are the control flow statements for most of we will be using. It is not about only this thing. We do have like other different types to go ahead and loop. Like we do have for each row for specific for the data table, and then maybe just the way which I have showed you in the workflow, you can just take your control back to the previous activity and then use some decision making statements to break that loop. All those things we can use, but the control flow statements are if, while, do while, for each, switch, and parallel. So we'll see one after the other in this. So the if statement. So here, if the word itself is going to say, it's going to check if this is true or false. So in the condition that is verified, the true potential outcome is a true or false, whether the condition was true or whether the condition was false. The then branch sets the action to be executed when the condition is true, and the else part is going to set the action to be executed when the condition is false. Like, what is the difference that based on the chosen two different layouts or this one? Let me show you guys what are the different, what is this two different types we do have is, okay. So here I have taken a sequence. And inside of the sequence, so let's consider I have an activity called if. I'll say if the sum is greater than 50. And then here you say you have then, and then we have this else part. And let me remove this. This should be fine. And execution info result is less than 50, and then I'll sorry, this is, let me make it as less than 50, and I'll just make a copy and paste. I'll just make it as greater than 50. So here we do have the condition, that is another if condition. This if we will be able to have like we will not be having the control decision decision workflow here inside of the sequence. So the simple if will work instead of a sequence where you will have a then part and the else part. Then part is nothing but when the condition we have mentioned here has been satisfied, then it will come to the then part. If the condition of this one is a false, then it always goes to the else part. And here in the import we have given 21 and 22, which will be a less than 50. So if I just debug this one, I'll get an output saying calculation completed, the result is less than 50 and which is 43. And if I just give something here and let me add something which goes more than 50, then it will go to the else part. And how are we going to check whether it was a true or false? You can obviously it will based on true or false. It is going to have this value. So here, like very simple way to debug this one. Okay, breakpoint and then debug. You will be having this window. Now the breakpoint has been hit. Give the same condition which I have given, sum is less than 50 and here it is returning false. This is how you will get to know whether it was a true or false if you really want to check what was the value. And then when I click on OK, it says the calculation completed, the result is greater than 50 and the value is 63. This is how the if condition inside of the sequence has been used. And for the same thing, okay, let me go to design flowchart. Plain flowchart, and here I'm just going to call the same calculate sum, and here instead of if I can take a decision flow decision. This is also going to give us a true or false as an output. So in the similar way, I am just going to define the condition here, like sum is less than 50. Okay, I just have to create the variable called sum of the type I want the double, control save. Here I'm passing which is less than 50. I'm taking all these things. I'm creating a sum, and here I'm taking this execution info. I'm just going to create one of the variable called execution info. And here in the execution info, it is already assigned to the string. And now in this one, I'm just going to take the same message box and put it here. Control C, Control V. So these are the two different types of if you can use, one in the sequence and another one is in the flowchart. And this is less than 50 and this one should be greater than 50. So here, if you are not able to edit here, you can always go to the properties, take this and make this greater than 50. Control save. So here, if you just look at this one, I have not created a new workflow again. I have invoked the same workflow. So this is how the invoking and the arguments is going to help us to avoid writing the duplicate piece of code multiple times. So here it says the calculation completed, the result is less than 50 and 0. Why? Because I have not passed any of the arguments here for the first value and the second value. If I just pass it something like 40 and 20, I'll click on OK and then I'll just debug this one. I got the output calculation completed, result is greater than 50, that is nothing but the 60. So this is how the if condition has been worked differently from the sequence and from the flowchart. So let's look at the next control flow. If you want more details about the if, you can just go ahead with the has been provided here. And then we'll go to the loops. What is loops? Why do we really need the loops? So now we have seen, like, based on the condition, whether we want to go for the if part, else the then part, or the else part. If it is true, then go to the true side, or if it is the false, then go to the false side. But now I want some piece of code to be executed repeatedly for certain number of times, or some certain, until some condition has been true. I want that keep on same piece of code should be keep on executing until I got that specific condition has been become true. Or let's consider I have a list or I have an array, like which has around some 5 or 6 different types of inputs. You don't know basically whether maybe in let's consider if it is a list, you will not get to know the exact number of inputs in the list. Sometimes it might be 3, sometimes it may be 10. But whatever the number of times it is, whatever the number of elements you do have inside of that specific list, you want to execute that for each and every item inside of that list. In those cases, we are going to use the loops. So loops are nothing but the repetitions of a set of operations. Like it will be keep on set of actions which is going to keep on executing until the condition become false, or until for all the elements has been executed inside of the input list which you have provided. So we do have do while, and for each for the looping purpose. Do while is executes. What is the difference between the do while and the while is the do while executes first and then it will check the condition. Like the minimum number of execution in the do while will be 1 and the minimum number of execution is 0. Like in while it will just check the condition first and then it will go ahead and execute that statement or the piece of code which you have written inside of the while. And then for each nothing but it is going to perform the activity or the series of activities for each element. The I have explained, let's consider if it is in the list. For each elements inside of that list, it is going to execute for all of them. So that is about the loops, and let's see how it works in the loops. Let me close this one and open that one. Do while. Let me close this. That says about the do while. So here we have a condition and I'm checking this one. Here is a do while. This is the container of a do while, where the way I said the do while will execute the code at least once before it checks for the condition, right? And then when I execute this one, I'm sorry, give me a minute. I lost power. Is my screen visible?
Yes, screen is visible.
So let some settings. Okay, so this is what the do while which I was explaining. It will at least execute. Right, just give me a minute. Let me just give me a minute. I'm sorry. Option. Just go. Stop video. Sorry about that. I have lost my power. I just had to change some settings. Okay. Okay. So this is how the do while looks like. And if you just go ahead and look on the properties, it takes only the condition. And inside of the condition, you just have to give whether it is a not is leap year or not leap year. You can just go ahead. And here I'm using the same input dialog box. And here I'm year as an input. So when I run this, it will please enter the year. So I'll take 2021, not a leap year. So let me give 2022, not a leap year. Let me give 2024. It is a leap year, and it will stop the execution. If you just observe this one until you give the year, which is actual.
Yeah, can you increase the size again? Sorry, maybe zoom to 140. Yeah.
This looks good. Okay.
The screen is stuck actually, Divyashree.
Can I just reshare it?
Yes, please. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, that's where you were.
Yes.
That. Okay. Make it as 110 to 120. Looks good. Okay. So here, if we are going to execute this one, so here what this actually the do while is doing is, as I mentioned, the minimum number of execution of the do while will be 1. So even though the condition is not met, it will going to run once. And here the condition is not a leap year. If it is not a leap year, it is going to execute this code once again. So it is nothing but it is going to keep on running the code until we are going to give an year which is actually a leap year. So when I'm executing this piece of code and gives the input as 2024 in the very first one, it will check now. And when I click on OK, it says it's a leap year. Then it will stop the execution. So this is how, until this condition has been met, it will be keep on executing. But in do while, the minimum number of execution will be 1. And if I want to keep on looping until the user is going to execute, input the value, which is the leap year, and if any user give 2021 first, which is not a leap year, I want to again execute the same piece of code. 2022, which is not a leap year, I want to execute this once again, and then 2024, yes, then it will stop. This is how you can actually loop the same code until some condition has been met. The only difference between the do while and the while is the while is a entry condition loop where it is going to check the condition first and then it is going to execute the code, and the do while is a exit condition check, so it is going to execute the code first and then it is going to check for the condition. If the condition is true, then it is going to go ahead and execute once again. If the condition is false, it is going to stop the execution there. So this is about the while and do while. And then we do have for each. Yeah. The for each is nothing but, okay. The for each is nothing but for each element instead of a list or for each element instead of a row. When we have this, the type of the database, like let's consider a list or it is a data table, or it is an array, or it is a dictionary. When we have this, the data type, which is of the type of collections, and inside of the collection, if we want to execute each and every element inside of that collection, we are going to use a for each. So example for each is, to take for each, and I'm going to take one of the examples for each. So here, okay, here I do have select folders, and inside of the variable, I have given like folder paths, and in the properties, I do have some folder path, and inside of this, I'm getting all the files of inside of the folder, and for each files of that folder, I'm just going to assign, and if there is something, anything with respect to the PDF, I'm just going to rename that, and then I'm just going to have it here. Let me remove this for now, and I'll just save, and I'm just going to take one of the input variable, like, yeah, I do have multiple PDFs here. I'm just going to take this path and select the folder source, the folder path, remittance invoices. I'm just going to paste it here as a default value. Control V. Okay. Yes. Let me debug this one. Execution started. Okay, let me do this. Okay. Control save. And thoughts. At the breakpoint, I'm just going to execute this. Execution has been started. I have it here. I'll just do step over, and I just want to quickly check about this one as invoice array. So I do have so many PDF files. I'm just going to display the new files as here. So here, if you just look at this, for each and every invoice I do have, for which the date has been updated for today's date. The original was only this one, like invoice so and so, and for which I was able to append this date. So this dynamically, I'm taking some folder in all this folder I have to call the PDF files. And here, if you just look at this one, Abby 2022, and that was the original one, and the output was your Abby 2022, and then 523. 531. So we are able to append this text for each PDF files inside of that specific folder. So this is how we can use the for each to loop for every item which is present in the folder, or for every item which is present inside of the collection. So here I have taken this invoice array as a type of a variable, that is nothing but an array. So for each element inside of an array, we are performing some actions. Whether it is 1, whether it is 100, it is going to execute this piece of code dynamically based on the number of elements which are present inside of that specific collection. So that's how we are going to use for each statement. And then the switch. Switch is more about, like, it is a type of the control flow statement that executes the set of activities out of multiple. Like it is going to execute one case inside of multiple. So let's consider, we know, like always, the output of, let's consider the user is going to give only one input, and that input may be anything, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I do have 5 different inputs. A user can choose any one out of 5, and based on user has been chosen, my code has to be executed. Let's consider if I have choose 1, then the code inside of the first use case has to be executed. In other words, we use it instead of a if statement when we have based at least 3 potential courses of action. That is nothing but, I think if you have knowledge of else if ladder, all of these things, like in else if ladder, we will be keep on checking, okay, if this condition is true, then execute this. If it is false, then go ahead and check for another condition. If that condition true, then go ahead and execute the specific code. If it is false, again go ahead and check for another condition. So instead of having this else if ladder, we can have a switch case. This is done through the condition, which is not a boolean, but it is like a case of the statement. But it is going to help us to execute the multiple executions. I mean, choose one decision based on multiple inputs. So just to give you an example with respect to switch, is I'm going to pick up another one, start, and I'm going to take the switch. So we do have 2 different types of switch. One is the switch sequence and another one is a flowchart switch. So I'll take the switch sequence first. I can close the other one. How we had this if condition 2, if condition 1 for the sequence and another one for the flowchart. We do have 2 different types of switches, one for the sequence and another one for the flowchart. So this one, switch sequence, so all invoices, that is a dictionary, and then here, like I'm taking like all the files for this one, for the invoices, and I'm just taking, like, if it's going to take, okay, instead of this one, I'll just give you guys a very simple one. Here we're just trying to move all the files and all of those things. Instead of this, I'm just going to create one simple sequence switch. It is going to help you guys even with respect to the assignment which will be taken care, right? So I'm just going to take the same input dialog text to be quoted as age, age, and I will be able to create one of the variable called age. And here I'll take the switch control flow switch. Here itself you will be able to see this different one, right? So here I'm going to take this age as a case, and properties of this one is string to integer, variable string. So okay, let me this one. Each number take one of the assign page number is equal to convert to int 32 of each, and okay, simple thing. Let me give this one. Okay, I'll take age number. Oh, sorry. Control Z. Let me do this. Input dialog. I have taken this. I really do not need this. Here you can actually define the type of the argument. Let me take it as a string. So here, anyway, I'm taking the input dialog from the user, and whatever the type, like you can define the type of the each case here as a type of an argument. I'm taking it as a string. So here I'm taking this age as an input dialog from the user, and let me use this as in the string. I'm passing it as pen, and I'll just write a line. The age is 10. And I'll take another one like some 30. If the case is 30, I'm just going to take this one and I'll print the age is 30. And if it is something else other than this one, I do have the default one, for which I can just mention the age is not in list. Okay, this is a very simple switch case where I do have multiple, piece of line, the line of code to be executed, in which it's going to pick based on whatever the user has been given. That is nothing but based on the input, it is going to execute that specific line of code. So if I'm just going to execute this one, it is going to take an input from the user. So here I'm just going to give it 10. And when I click on OK, it says in the output, the age is 10. And now I'm just going to execute something else, which is not as defined here. That is nothing but I'm just going to give some random number as 28 or 38. So the age was not in the list. So the age is not in the list. That is nothing but which is defined in the default. So this is how the switch case is going to work, where it is going to check for the condition in which we have defined. If the condition has been met for the input, it is going to execute that specific line of code. If that has not been met, whatever it is defined inside of the default portion, it is going to execute that as a default statement or the default line of code, which is going to be executed in that iteration. So this is all about the control flows. We have seen if, while, do while. Okay, maybe for while we have not seen the example, but whatever the example which we have seen for the do while, maybe you can just take this as an assignment also, convert the same do while workflow to the while, right? That will be your one of the assignment which you can just go ahead and try it out. And then we have seen for each file inside of one of the folder, we took that name of the file, we append the today's date to that specific name of that file, and we have displayed it. And then we have seen the switch case, where we have taken one of some random numbers and we have defined the cases inside of each case, and we have wrote the line of the code to match each cases. And then if that matches, that case has been executed. If that case has not been defined, the default case was executed. This is all about variables, arguments, flow activities. And we have also seen like doing the very small string manipulations about concatenation, replacement. We have seen these two. Please go ahead and try about these string manipulations, not only about replace and concatenation. You can also look for others like to upper, to lower, replacement. These are the very simple string manipulation activities scenario, most of the scenarios which was defined for today's agenda. And this is the course for your homework. You can just find the same course in the academy.uipath.com. You can just go ahead, you can have this link here. I'll put this in the chat. Go ahead, complete this module in the academy.uipath.com, post it in a LinkedIn, and add a hashtag about the UiPath community and the UiPath Kickstart, and then you can post your certificates in your LinkedIn. And like for your assignment, this will be your problem statement. Like we have already seen like how to create two different workflows and call one instead of the another one. So here you are creating two different workflows. One is main and the second one is a age calculator. And in the main, you are going to create three variables that is nothing but the name, date of birth, and the age. And in the age calculator workflow, you are going to create two arguments. One is the input arguments, that is the date of birth, and the output arguments, which will be an age. So you just have to go ahead in the age calculator based on the date of birth. You have to calculate the age and pass that as an out argument back to the main. And then in the main, you just have to display that if you just have to check if the age is less than 18, you just have to display whatever that username plus as a teenager. Or if the age is greater than 18 and less than 60, you just have to print that whatever that name which the username has given. Like you can just take the input dialog box to take this age and as well as the name. So you have to use two different input dialogs here, one for the name, one for the age, one for the name and one for the date of birth. And then you can just display based on the age we are getting. You are going to just change the display message: name plus teenager, name plus adulthood, name is in old age if he is greater than 60 years. And just to like enhance this one, instead of taking everything inside of a if condition, you can assign these things to the three cases. How we have done this 10 and 30, you can just define three different cases: teen, adult, and old as a three different cases. And then based on the output of this age, based on the number of that one, in the if condition, you can assign that like the case is teen or the case is adult or the case is old. And then based on that, you will be able to print this message inside of the switch case. This is about the problem statement. It's a very simple one, and I think most of that we have already covered in today's session. You will be able to go ahead and try it out. If you have any questions, you can always come back to us. You can write us back in LinkedIn or in any open forum. We will be there to answer. So this will be your assignment. I think it's already been there in your today's link as well, the same problem statement which has been already displayed in your today's link as well. So, any questions?
Yeah, Divya, there are a few questions on the chat. Rajeshwari has some question around the homework itself.
Okay. Can I just scroll to the bottom? Okay. The date of birth also have to create as an argument to call in age calculator. Yes, that is correct. You have to create a date of birth as an argument, which will be an input argument, so that based on that date, you can calculate an age and pass it as an output argument, the age as an output argument. Yes, the link for today's assignment is this. See. This will be the module from the academy.uipath.com to be completed. Okay, parallel in brief is nothing but, let's consider I do have set of actions which needs to be executed in parallel. So basically we do call that as a parallel, but the execution actually happens in the sequence manner. So here if you just take this parallel activity, and inside of this one I do have, let's consider right line in the first parallel, and I'm just going to use hi. All right, I'm just going to execute once again. So I think instead of this one, let me take this inside of the parallel. Let me take, okay, wait. I want one more here inside of this one. So where exactly we use the parallel, I'm just going to give you an example is hi and right. If I just execute this, it's going to execute both of this one, hi Divya, one after the other. But how the control is going to move in this parallel activity, and when are we going to use this parallel activity is, let's consider I'm using one of the application. Let's consider I'm using an Outlook, right? In the Outlook, there might be chances where we will have this like allow Outlook to send an email pop-up, and that pop-up you don't know when exactly it comes. So I'm just giving you an example, right? So here I want to execute each and every step which has supposed to be done in the Outlook, but I exactly don't know where exactly that pop-up comes. In that case, I'm going to define all the set of actions in my first parallel sequence, and in my second parallel, I'm going to, if the element exists of that pop-up, create, okay, allow send an email, and then click on OK. In that case, what happens in this parallel is, let's consider I have five actions inside of my first parallel sequence, and the pop-up, checking of that pop-up available. If yes, then click on that one in my second parallel. Okay, it executes the first activity inside of the first parallel, then it will check if there is a pop-up. If no, it will come back and it will execute the next activity here. And then if that, after execution of this second activity inside of the first parallel, then again it will go and check if there is a pop-up inside of in that specific application. If we have any such kind of unusual thing where you really have to keep on monitor on unattended based, then we are going to use this parallel activity so that we can make sure about that we have handled both those unexpected pop-ups and also the set of actions which needs to be executed has been taken care. So that's where we are going to use parallel most of the time. So
yeah, so Stain, I got your question. So so it won't be able to, we won't be able to cover that during this course, but I will share the link to